So many people, just a stream of people coming through to venerate the relics, and there's been a lot of tears. You know, people praying for their family members that are away from the faith, and just wanting them to have the same love for Jesus as they have. And that's what Carlo was like, and that's what Blessed Saint Emmanuel was like. And so it's beautiful that since the Eucharistic revival has begun, and Bishop Cousins, who is in charge of the Eucharistic revival, talked with the bishops about how important it is that we revive the importance of relics, that relics are so powerful, and we have lost that devotion to the saints. And so he decided, along with a number of the other bishops, that they would pick out two saints, or a saint and a blessed, because Carlo was blessed, who were very in love with the Eucharist, because the whole purpose of the Eucharistic revival is to rekindle that love of Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. He's here 24 hours a day. What is that like, to be abandoned from morning till night and from night till morning? What would that be like if that happened to us, where we were abandoned in such a way? And so for that reason, they chose these two saints who did so much work to bring the Eucharist in the places where they were, to rekindle that devotion to the Eucharist. And so this is why these two saints were chosen. But I guess, because we haven't heard a lot about relics, the question that many people have asked is, what are relics? And relics are parts of the body of very saintly persons. They have been honored by the Catholic Church because they have lived a great, heroic, saintly life. And they were greatly devoted to God. And for those people that have lived that kind of a life, when they die, and people begin a cult to them and begin praying and asking these people to intercede before God for them, there must be two miracles attributed to the intercession of the candidate. One, to declare him as blessed, and the other to declare him as a saint, as a canonized saint. Now there were usually, and this is another question people ask, how many of the different kinds of relics? And yes, there are. There are first-class relics, which is always part of the body, the bone, the teeth, the hair, blood. Those are all considered first-class relics. And second-class relics are usually something that the person's even worn, rosaries and medals that they've used and medals that they've worn, and other things like holy books that they've read and prayed with. These become second-class relics. And then third-class relics are objects that have been touched to either the first-class relic or the second-class relic. So, during the Eucharistic revival in the United States, Catholic bishops really prayerfully chose these relics to tour the United States. Now, the relic of Carlo Acutis is known as God's digital disciple, because this was a young man who loved the internet. And he learned how to use the internet with great discipline. And the other person is St. Manuel Garcia Gonzalez. And he's known as the Bishop of the Abandoned Tabernacle. And I'll explain a little bit about each of these saints, because I don't know how many of you were here this morning, and it's kind of good to hear the story again anyway, because they're such fascinating people. Carlos was born on May 3rd, 1991, actually in London. His mother and father were on a business trip there. So on September 8th, they returned to Milan, Italy. And this kid had three loves. One was soccer, one was video games, and the other was Jesus Christ. And, after his first communion and his confirmation, once he realized that, I've received the risen Jesus. He's in my heart. This is God. I got to get to know him. I got to really spend some time with him. Because how can you have a friend if you don't spend time with them? So he made the decision that every morning he was going to go to Mass on the way to school. And then on the way home from school, he was going to stop in and talk to Jesus about his day. So he did that. At night, he'd come back into the church and he'd say, "Hi, Jesus, it's Carlo. Just want to tell you a little bit about my day, and then I got to run home." How great. And he formed this relationship with Jesus that was just so wonderful, and his love for the Eucharist and his love for the Blessed Sacrament, for the Mass, just grew and grew in this little boy. And he knew his faith so well because he went on the internet and used to read everything about his faith. And so he decided to ask his pastor if he could help with the catechesis in the parish. And so they allowed him to do that. And I don't know, this was around, he was 11, 12, 13 maybe, I don't know for sure. But, and they let him help one of the teachers. He helped out in that classroom. And then the teacher said to the pastor, he knows his faith so well, we could give him his own class. And so they did. They gave him a class with kids his own age. And he was so excited because he wanted his friends to really understand that Jesus is in that tabernacle. He is alive. He is a person. And he's looking out at us with great love from his human and divine eyes, wanting to love us. And he wanted his friends to understand the holy sacrifice of the Mass so much. And they used to say, "Carlo, it's just so boring." And so we went to the pastor and he said, "I'm not discouraged, but I don't know how to help them understand how precious the Mass is." And so his pastor brought him into the sacristy and he showed him this picture from a church in Italy, in Lanciano, Italy, where a Eucharistic miracle had actually occurred. And he said to him that there was a priest there who really didn't believe that at the consecration, the bread and the wine actually become the body and blood of Jesus Christ. And as he was praying the prayers of consecration, he begged Jesus, "Help me. If this is true, Jesus, help me to understand this." And so just at the time of the consecration, as he raised that host, it began to bleed. And the blood was dripping into the chalice and on the corporal and on the paten. And what he noticed on the paten, that the bread, the wheat, had turned, the host had turned to real flesh. And he was so taken aback by this. And he called all the people in the church up to come and see this, because he didn't know whether he was just thinking this happened. And people were amazed, and they brought the bishop. And over time, they have done 3 scientific studies on both the blood and the flesh. And the flesh is from Christ's heart muscle. It's part of his heart. And to me, that's so incredible to think what Jesus wants us to know is, even though a lot of times he's abandoned in that tabernacle from morning till night and night till morning, that his heart is in love with us. And he really wants us to know that. And so it's so powerful. And they did that scientific study on both the host, and which turned to flesh, and on the blood as well. And so this made Carlos so excited, he decided, this is it. I gotta get on the internet and find out. There must be other miracles in other places in the world. So he did this big search for Eucharistic miracles, like all over the world, and found, and as many in the time he had, 152 miracles that were proven by the church to be authentic. And so he put those 152 miracles, made these big placards, and had his mom and dad helping him, and his mom and dad taking him to see some of these Eucharistic miracles. And this little boy's mom and dad had no faith. And it's amazing, because it's a caretaker that helped him to understand his faith. And that's why he made his first communion and his confirmation. And then his mother and father, taking him to these places, began to grow in the faith. And so he was even converting his own mom and dad. And so they helped him put all these placards together, because the first place where he wanted to have an exhibit of all these Eucharistic miracles was in his high school. And so they went the first day that they went to put up these Eucharistic miracles for people to come and look at. He began to feel sick, and he said, "I'm so sick, I don't think I can even stand up." So his mom right away took him to the doctors, and they did blood work, and they said, "Well, we're really not sure, but bring him back again tomorrow if he's still not feeling good." And so they brought him back the next day, and when he came back, the doctor said he has M3 acute leukemia. And so the next morning, he couldn't even get out of bed. And he died about 4 or 5 days later. So he never saw his own Eucharistic exhibit. But that Eucharistic exhibit has been all over the world. Isn't that amazing? He died in 2006. And since that time, these Eucharistic miracles have been everywhere, because when people saw that he did these placards, they said, we need to spread this so we can spread Eucharistic devotion. We can bring people back to the Eucharist to know that Jesus is truly present in the Eucharist. It's a person in the Eucharist. It's a person in the tabernacle, both human and divine, looking out with those eyes so full of love for us. And so what a great thing Carlo did. And this was a kid who loved soccer. He loved video games, and he loved Jesus Christ. And he learned to discipline himself even with the video games, because he said to his mom one day, you know, Mom, every time we play these video games, you know, they used to play the games for hours, they'd all get very aggravated with one another by the end of it and be fighting with each other. And so she said, Carlo, it's like I said to you, when you spend that much time on video games, what happens is you lose focus in here, and it starts to become an addiction. So you've got to discipline yourself to 1 hour playing these video games. And he did that. So then he used that extra time to be looking up all those beautiful Eucharistic miracles. And so what a gift this young man is to all the young people. God's digital friend has, you know, given kids, and most of us with our phones, you know, an understanding that we have to discipline ourselves in how we use technology. So what a gift he is to the world. And then our very good friend, Saint Manuel Garcia Gonzalez, as a young priest, you know, he had gotten quite a bit of education. He was very educated, but his cardinal sent him up into the mountains of Spain in a place called Palomares de Rio. And when he got to that place, he was speaking to the sacristan, you know, where are the people and why aren't they here and how many people are in the parish? And the sacristan said to him, you know, I really hate to tell you, but nobody comes to church. They come only to be married, baptized, and for funerals. Outside of that, they don't come to church. And so we opened the door to the church with him, and when he went into the church, he was shocked, so shocked, because the church was so filthy dirty. And as he walked up closer to the tabernacle, he saw that it was covered with cobwebs and spiders. And Jesus was in the Blessed Sacrament there. And the sanctuary light was dripping oil all over the place, on the altar cloth, on the floor. Everything was a mess and disarray. And he fell on his knees in front of the Blessed Sacrament. And he stayed there a very long time. You know, just so deeply grieved. And he's thinking this in his heart. What am I going to say to my bishop? How can I stay in a place like this? You know, the sacristan told him that there are so many political factions there that the former priest wouldn't even live in the village. And so he's thinking, how am I going to get out of this place? And just as he was thinking that, he said, you know, he begins to describe it, and I want to take it. He wrote much. I think in Spanish, there are about 52 books that this beautiful man has written, and most of it is in Spanish and French. And there's a wonderful woman who took some of that and she put it in a little tiny book, and it's called The Bishop of the Abandoned Tabernacle. And I'd just like to read one little quote from what he says in the book, because to me, it's so grabbing to your heart. He described the moment of grace saying, my faith was looking at Jesus through the door of the tabernacle, so silent, so patient, so good, gazing right back at me. His gaze was telling me much and asking me for more. It was a gaze in which the sadness of the Gospels reflected the sadness of the no room in the inn, the sadness of the words, do you want to leave me also? The sadness of being betrayed by Judas, the denial of Peter, the soldiers who slapped him, of the spittle that that was upon him in the praetorium, and the abandonment of everyone. All the sadness that was there in the tabernacle, oppressing and crushing the heart of Jesus and drawing bitter tears from his eyes. His gaze was the sorrow of one who loves, but does not find anybody who wants to receive that love. Saint Emmanuel wants to know if we will join him, feeding Jesus with our love, keeping Jesus warm in our presence, entertaining Jesus with our conversations. Will we defend Jesus against abandonment and ingratitude? This kind of love has to be learned, he said, by the heart, not in the mind. And you cannot learn it unless you spend time with your friend in the tabernacle. So how touching, and this man this little book that was written really explains to people how to pray before the Blessed Sacrament. And we do have the books downstairs. They're maybe about that thick and maybe about that big. So if you get a chance to go down there and look at them, he will really teach you and your family how to love Jesus in the tabernacle. Now, I also think it's good for people to know what the church teaches about carrying the ashes of loved ones whose body's been cremated. And this is what the church says. Regarding the ashes of the body that has been cremated, the ash may never be used as mementos in jewelry or like amulets or kept in the person's home. Out of respect for the deceased person, in the sacredness of baptism, cremations must be buried, and they must have a Christian burial in a Christian cemetery or placed in a mausoleum. And it's so important that we understand the difference between these relics that we're venerating and our parents and siblings that have died. Because our parents and siblings have never had a cult where people have begun to pray to them and prayers are answered and little miracles happen. That hasn't happened to them yet. But with these two saints and many of the other canonized saints, miracles have occurred after they've died. And so countless people go and they testify before the bishop of the diocese to tell them about what has happened that's either miraculous or some kind of healing, a favor of people coming back to the church, whatever it could be. So when that happens, the bishop compiles all that and he sends it to Rome. And then Rome will look at that, and then the person will be named venerable. And they then become beatified when a miracle like an incurable disease happens to the person. And many people are praying for that person to be cured of that incurable disease. And they're praying, like to Carlo, like to Manuel. And they're cured, totally and completely cured. And so all that medical history, plus the physician, goes to Rome to testify before a board of people that work at the Office of Beatification to prove that this was truly an incurable disease. And so that's how we know that we can honor and venerate these relics. And our family yet hasn't, or our friends haven't reached that point yet. And that's why they need to truly, we cannot keep their ashes, they must be buried. And so this has been an incredible day being here. And if there's anybody that's in the church now that still has not venerated the relic, this is such a special grace that you receive. We would like you now to come up, just line up in the middle aisle, and you can touch the relic with your fingers. With Carlos, it's a piece of tissue from his heart. With Manuel, it's a piece of bone. And Carlos' relic is recessed, so you can like put your rosary in there and touch your rosary, and that becomes a third-class relic. If you have a scapular, it becomes a third-class relic if you touch it to the relics. So if there is anyone who still would like to come up, if you haven't already venerated the relics, we'd like you to come up and have that opportunity, because these opportunities are rare, and I hope they become more common, because this is what part of the CCB is, USCCB is trying to do, is to revive our understanding of how precious relics are, because many, many times miracles are performed by their intercession before the throne of God. So thank you very much. Thank you for coming, and thank you for listening. God bless all.